لكن زي هيوستن تكسانز الخاصة بمبارياتنا التنافسية هو مجرد عمل فني جميل. والآن قبل أن نصنف هذه الأزياء وأضع تكسانز كأفضل زي مظهراً، أعني هيا بنا. أما منظر يا رجل، هذه الأزياء أنيقة جداً. دي ميكو، أريدكم أن تعرفوا أنها ليست أنيقة فحسب، وليست فقط تحتوي على لون هيوستن الأزرق.
That reaction tells you immediately this is not really a uniform ranking. This is a Houston fan looking at a jersey and seeing the city itself. And once that becomes the standard, every other team is walking into somebody else's home field argument.
ولأكون صادقاً بدون مزاح، كشخص نشأ في هيوستن، أليس كذلك؟ من الواضح عندما كنت ماذا يسمى أصغر سناً، لوحات الأسماء البلاطية هذه يا إلهي، إنها تذكرك بكونك في المدينة. أنت تعلم أنك سترى ذلك. وفوق ذلك، هذا الترقيم مشابه أيضاً نوعاً ما. الآن لست متأكداً إذا كان هذا في كل مكان في هيوستن، لكن حيث كنت أعيش، إذا كنت ماذا يسمى على مثل ماذا تسميه ممر السيارة، في ممر السيارة هناك شيء صغير قبل الممر حيث يبدأ عند صندوق البريد، ثم أرقام عنوانك تكون مرسومة بذلك النوع من الخط المربع أيضاً. لذا كانت بمثابة جرعة مزدوجة من الحنين إلى الماضي وما شابه.
Listen to why he keeps coming back to the details. The color matters, the numbers matter. Even the shape of the lettering reminds him of markings he remembers seeing around Houston growing up. That is a completely different emotional test from asking whether a jersey is simply clean or ugly. And that is what makes these rivalry uniforms interesting. The NFL can release 7 or 8 alternate looks, put them side by side, and technically everybody is judging the same thing, but fans are not actually looking at the same thing. One person sees a stripe, another person sees a decade of football, one person sees an unusual shade of blue. Somebody from Houston hears an argument about who gets to claim a piece of the city's identity. That distinction is going to matter when he starts tearing into Detroit and Chicago, because his rankings get less and less about safe design and more about whether a uniform feels like it belongs somewhere.
نعم، FG يقول أن زي فريق كولز هو الأفضل. فريق كولز ليس الأمر أنه سيء. بالنسبة لي، زي كولز ممل. أنا فقط أعتقد أن زي كولز ممل. الآن هذا مظهر جديد ومميز. أنا أحب ذلك مجددا. أنا شخص يحب المبالغة، لذا ربما أكون مخطئا، لكن هذا يبدو. هل تفهم قصدي؟ هذا القدر مناسب تماما مع طابع الفايكنج النورديك. لقد أبدعتم يا رفاق. فريق الفايكنج أبدعوا بشكل كبير. ومجددا أنا معجب كبير
And there is the first real clue to the entire list. He admits he likes exaggeration. He likes uniforms that announce themselves, that immediately puts a team like Green Bay or Chicago at a disadvantage if the design is built around restraint, tradition, or subtle detail. You can disagree with that taste, but at least the criteria are becoming clear. He is rewarding personality. He wants to look at a uniform for half a second and know the designers took a swing. That also means the safest uniforms might actually get punished harder than the weird ones. A strange jersey can create an argument. A boring jersey creates nothing. And later, when he finally explains why one of these teams falls all the way toward the bottom, that difference between bad and uninspired becomes the most important part of the ranking.
ذلك يا رجل، أزياء الجاكوار هذه جنونية يا رجل، وقد رأيت هذا في المتجر الفعلي. إنه بلون كريمي. إنه لون كريمي. لا أعرف كيف. هل تفهم ما أقوله؟ أوه نعم، لا، نعم، 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 فريق فايتنج إليني. نعم، هذا الشيء، فريق فايتنج إليني. عن ماذا تتحدثون جميعا؟ لكن لا، في الواقع أعتقد أن قميص بيرز جيد أيضا.
The Jaguars are where this gets fun because he sees the cream tone and immediately responds to the fact that it is different. That is not a conventional football color combination, and for him, that is the point. There are really two schools of thought with alternate uniforms. One says you protect the brand, keep the primary colors recognizable, make 1 or 2 tasteful changes, and let the helmet do most of the work. The other says, if the league is giving you a special rivalry uniform, why would you use that opportunity to create something that could pass for a normal Sunday alternate? He is very clearly in the second camp. And watch how that standard changes the next few rankings, because teams that leaned harder into theme are about to rise, while some of the more conservative designs start getting treated like missed opportunities.
أعتقد أن الكثيرين يعتقدون أن المركز الأول سيكون من نصيب جرين باي باكرز. رأيت الكثير من الناس يحبون هذه، تحتوي على خطوط بتصميم قوطي للأرقام الأمامية أو شيء من هذا القبيل، لديها ذلك اللون الأبيض المصفر مع الخوذة. هذه أنيقة يا رجل، مهلا. وتوقفوا عن منادات قمصان تكسانز بقمصان SMU. هذه لا تشبه قمصان SMU. آسف، هي ليست كذلك. لقد شاهدت الكثير من مباريات كرة القدم. هذا ليس.
Green Bay is the perfect counterexample. He likes it. The off-white look works for him. The helmet works. The numbers have enough retro character to separate the set from an ordinary Packers combination. But notice the difference in his energy. He respects Green Bay. He is emotionally attached to Houston. That matters because uniform debates pretend to be objective while almost never being objective. Fans talk about fonts, striping, helmets, contrast, historical references, and color balance like they are sitting inside a design studio. Then the second their own team appears, all of that methodology disappears, and he actually gives you a pretty entertaining version of that bias. Somebody compares Houston's look to another team, and suddenly this is no longer a fashion conversation. Now it is territorial. There is also a broader reason these alternate uniforms create so much reaction. A regular home jersey can survive by being familiar. An alternate has to justify its existence. If it changes almost nothing, fans ask why it was needed. If it changes too much, fans say the franchise has lost its identity. That leaves a narrow target, different enough to feel special, familiar enough to still look like your team. Green Bay appears to have landed close to that target for him. But the uniform sitting above it has something Green Bay cannot compete with in this particular ranking: hometown nostalgia.
هذا هو أزرق هيوستن يا بني. الآن دعوني أتحدث عن لأنني أرى الجميع يروجون لام ديترويت لايونز أيضا. خوذة لايونز رائعة جدا. إنها مميزة. لا، ليست SMU. أنتم مجانين. لا، لن أقبل بذلك. الدردشة المباشرة تطلق على فريق هيوستن اسمه هيوستن SMU مستانج. لا يمكنكم. لا، لن أقبل بذلك. لا أقبل بهذا الأمر. قالوا الآن بعد أن قلت
There it is, Houston Blue. That little argument is more important than it sounds, because alternate uniforms often turn into arguments over ownership of colors, history, and regional football identity. He is not evaluating blue in isolation. He is evaluating what that shade means when it appears on a Houston uniform. And now the ranking has a second layer. It is no longer just which jersey looks best. It becomes which team understood what a rivalry uniform is supposed to do. A rivalry design should make the opponent slightly irritated before the game even begins. It should create something fans want to defend. If everybody looks at it and says, yes, perfectly acceptable, the design probably did not create much rivalry at all. Houston's uniform clearly created that reaction for him. He is defending it like the jersey itself is part of the matchup. But the sharpest moment comes next, because Detroit walks directly into the same color argument and gets none of the sentimental protection Houston received.
ننادي أنفسنا بهيوستن موستانج. الآن ديترويت لايونز، عليكم أن تشرحوا موقفكم. أنتم مهلنا. لا، يجب على ديترويت لايونز أن يشرحوا موقفهم. ما هذا؟ أنتم تستخدمون نفس اللون الأزرق. أنتم حاولتم جعلها تبدو لطيفة مع تلك الخطوط القتالية الصغيرة. لا إطلاقا، ليس أي من ذلك. مهلا، أبعدوهم من هنا يا صديقي. تخلصوا منهم. لا أريد رؤية المزيد من هذا يا صديقي. أنا أكره ذلك. أنا أكره ذلك. لكن الخوذة رائعة حقا.
That is the first genuinely ruthless ranking moment. Detroit's helmet gets praise, but the rest of the uniform does not convince him. And this is where you have to separate a great helmet from a great full set. NFL alternate reveals are often designed around the helmet because the helmet is the easiest piece to make dramatic. Metallic finishes, oversized logos, throwback marks, unusual striping, different face masks. On social media, that one image can carry the entire reveal. But then you zoom out. What does the jersey look like from the television camera angle? What happens when the pants and socks are included? Does the complete silhouette still feel distinctive, or did the helmet do all the work? His criticism of Detroit is basically that problem in real time. He keeps saying the helmet is crazy, the helmet is great, but he is much less impressed by everything underneath it. That is not the same as calling the uniform ugly. In fact, One of the most interesting things about his ranking is that he does not really think this group contains a disaster. He is sorting different levels of success, and that makes the bottom of the list harsher in a different way. When every uniform is at least competent, last place goes to the team that created the least excitement. There is another tension here too. Fans often claim they want timeless uniforms, but alternate uniform culture rewards novelty. The more a team avoids risk, the less reason there is for people to talk about the reveal. Detroit at least gave him a helmet worth discussing. Another team is going to get hit much harder because he thinks the entire look feels too familiar.
أقول انظر إنها رائعة وأنا أحب الشريط الجميلة لكن الأمر فقط هل تفهم ما أعنيه هيا يا رجل لكن لا الخوذة جنونية الخوذة جنونية للغاية ثم قلت الشيكاغو فايتنج إليني هذه تبدو أنيقة رغم ذلك أعني أنها جيدة أنا حقا أحب هذه أعني أنا لا أكرهها أنا فقط أخبركم جميعا هل تفهم ما
That phrase sums up Detroit's position perfectly. It is good, but the striping is nice, the helmet is memorable, the overall look is not offensive. It simply never gets him from approval to obsession, and that gap between approval and obsession is what special uniforms are fighting over. Think about how fans actually consume these releases now. The uniform has to survive the first leaked image, the official photo shoot, a dozen social media crops, Madden comparisons, throwback comparisons, and then finally the game itself. A safe design can look professional in every setting and still disappear from the conversation in 24 hours. A divisive design can stay alive for weeks. That is why the Jaguars can rank unusually high for someone with his taste. Their set gives you something specific to argue over. Maybe you love the lighter color. Maybe you think it is too much. Maybe you like the logo treatment. Maybe you hate it, but at least it creates a reaction. Detroit creates half of that reaction for him. The helmet gets there. The uniform does not, and Chicago is about to run into an even bigger version of the same problem.
أوه هذا لذا كما تعلم من العدل أنكم سخرتم مني يا رجل نظرة ثانية على زي فريق كولز هذا يا رجل ربما أنا فقط أكرهه لأنه من قسم AFC الجنوبي هذه أنيقة أعتقد أنها أفضل من هل تتذكرون القمصان السوداء التي كانوا يملكونها ماذا حدث تلك القطع السوداء والرمادية مع الخوذة السوداء أو أيا كان ماذا حدث لتلك على أي حال زي فريق كولز هذا ليس سيئا لكن دعونا نصل إلى
This is where division bias crashes into design bias. He gives the Colts another look and basically has to admit they are better than his first instinct wanted to allow. That is one of the better moments in the whole ranking because it exposes how quickly rivalry logic can distort the eye. If you already dislike the team, every design choice feels easier to criticize. But when he looks again, he sees a uniform that works. The question becomes whether working is enough. For a standard alternate, maybe it is. For a rivalry series, he wants more theater, more regional identity, more weirdness. Something that would look slightly excessive if a team wore it every week. That is why his reaction to older black Colts combinations matters. He remembers uniforms that changed the team's visual personality more aggressively. Against that memory, a cleaner current design can feel less adventurous even if the execution is stronger. This is also the point where the ranking becomes less about individual garments and more about expectations. You judge Green Bay against Green Bay history. You judge Houston against Houston identity. You judge Indianapolis against what the Colts normally look like. The same design choice can feel bold for one franchise and conservative for another. And once you start judging each team against its own visual baseline, there is no universal formula anymore. That is why fan rankings like this are so entertaining. The contradiction is part of the product. People want criteria right up until the criteria threaten their favorite team.
حال نعود لتصنيف هذه الأزياء سأقوم بترتيبها فورا وسأترك لكم المجال لتغييرها جرين باي أعتقد أنها في المركز الثاني كأفضل زي لا أستطيع الكذب عليكم ما هو أقبح زي هنا وليس لأنه الأقبح يا بريدجيت ليس لأنه الأقبح الأمر فقط أنه لا يثير حماسي كثيرا إنه الخوذة فقط هي الرائعة لا يوجد الكثير من التفاصيل لذا ليس قبيحا لا أعتقد أن أيا من هذه الأزياء قبيح.
Now we finally get the philosophy in plain language. His lowest ranked uniform is not necessarily ugly, it just does not excite him. That is a much stronger criticism in this context. Ugly can be memorable, ugly can become cult classic. Ugly can look strange in a studio reveal and then somehow become incredible under stadium lights. Fans have spent decades changing their minds about designs they originally hated. uninspired, is harder to rescue. If a special uniform feels like something you have already seen in a football video game, or like an alternate that could have existed 5 years ago without anybody noticing, then it fails the one advantage these rivalry designs have: permission to experiment. And that is the eventual answer his whole ranking has been building toward. He is not really asking which team made the most beautiful uniform. He is asking which team understood the assignment. For him, understanding the assignment means connecting the look to a place, pushing beyond the normal identity, and giving fans at least one feature worth arguing about. That explains why Houston dominates his list. It checks all 3 boxes for him. The blue connects to the city. The typography gives him a personal nostalgia hit, and the entire set is different enough that people immediately started debating what it resembles and who owns that visual territory. Now compare that with a uniform that might be technically polished but does not create any of those emotional hooks. That team is going to lose this particular scoring system every time, and Chicago, in his eyes, has exactly that problem.
تحية لمدينة شيكاغو، أنتم في المركز السابع هناك، أليس كذلك؟ حسناً، وبصراحة المركز الخامس، لحظة، واو، يجبرونني على تسجيل الدخول. دعوني أنهي هذا، بوم، دعوني أنهي هذا قبل أن يأتوا لأجلي، يا رجل، قبل أن يأتوا لأجلي، سأختار هذا هنا. لا زلت أحب هذه أزياء تبدو جيدة. إذا الترتيب عندي، تكسانز في المركز الأول. الأمر لا، ليس حتى محل نقاش. المركز الثاني، جرين باي باكرز. أنا أحب اللون الأخضر، يا صاحو، أنا أحب اللون الأخضر.
Chicago lands near the bottom because he feels like he has seen the concept before. Again, not terrible, just not special enough. That distinction tells you something about where NFL uniform design has gone. Teams are no longer competing only with each other. They are competing with their own archives. Every franchise now has throwbacks fans want restored, alternate helmets people campaign for, old color combinations that looked better in memory, and decades of concept art circulating online. The audience has seen almost every obvious idea before the team even releases it. So if you bring out a cream jersey, somebody remembers a college uniform. If you use powder blue, somebody connects it to an old local team. If you simplify the striping, fans compare it to a throwback. If you modernize the number font, half the audience says it looks like a video game. That makes true novelty incredibly difficult. But novelty is not the only path. Specificity might be more important. A design does not have to be completely original if it feels unmistakably tied to the franchise wearing it. That is where Houston wins with this particular fan. He can explain what the details remind him of. He can connect them to streets, colors, and memories. Even if somebody else sees those same elements and thinks of another football team, he has already built a stronger association. That is brand design doing exactly what teams want it to do. The uniform becomes personal before the player even puts it on.
المائلة للصفرة، أنا معجب به. المركز الثالث، جاكوارز. الآن، الجاكوارز، إذا وصفتموهم بالقبح، فلا بأس عندي. أنا أتفهم ذلك. إنها نوعاً ما. هل تفهمون ما أعنيه؟ إنها مبهرجة. إنها صارخة. أنا أحب ذلك. هذا هو ذوقي. لذا أنا معجب بتلك. لديهم شعار الجاكوار فاتح اللون. أحب كل شيء يتعلق بذلك. أحب اللمسات الإضافية لدى الفايكنج. لذا فهم في المركز الرابع. أولاد مدينة الموسيقى. أعتقد أن التايتنز كان بإمكانهم فعل المزيد، لكن في الوقت نفسه تبدو كوزي بديل عادي. لا تبدو كوزي لمنافسة. تبدو كشيء يجب أن يكون جزءاً من أزيائهم الأساسية.
And now the top half starts to make complete sense. Jacksonville gets rewarded because it is loud. Minnesota gets rewarded because the Nordic references and added details give the set an obvious theme. The Music City look gets credit, but he thinks it could have gone further. That last criticism is important because Tennessee sits in a strange position with any rivalry or city-inspired uniform. There is a lot of material available. Music culture, regional identity, franchise history, multiple shades associated with different eras of football in that market. If the final design looks too much like a regular alternate, fans are going to ask why the designer stopped halfway. And this is where I think his ranking becomes more useful than the order itself. Forget whether you personally agree with Texans first, Packers second, Jaguars third. The better question is whether each uniform can answer 3 things immediately. Why this color? Why this detail? Why this team? If the design cannot answer those questions without a paragraph from the marketing department, the connection probably is not strong enough. Minnesota's set gives you an answer quickly because the visual language points toward the team's Nordic branding. Jacksonville's set uses a deliberately unusual palette and accenting that he immediately associates with the Jaguars. Houston's set gives him city-specific meaning. Those are strong identities even if you dislike the aesthetics. A design can be beautiful and generic at the same time, and in a rivalry series, generic might be the bigger failure.
لهذا السبب هي في مركز متدن. أعتقد أنه جيد. كولز مرة أخرى إنه مظهر أنيق. أعتقد أنه يبدو أنيقا في المرة الثانية التي نظرت فيها إليه، لكنه فقط غير ملهم. أشعر أنني رأيت شيكاغو. أشعر أنني رأيت هذا في لعبة ماد قديمة من قبل. لهذا السبب هي في هذا المركز المتدني. ثم إذا كنت ستنسخ، هل تفهم ما أعنيه؟ إذا كنت ستنسخ من شخص ما، أو هو يمكنك، أو هو لمرة واحدة فقط. لم أكن أعلم أنه يمكنك فعل ذلك. هذا موقع رائع حقا. إذن هذا هو.
That is the danger he keeps coming back to. If he can imagine the uniform already existing somewhere else, its ranking drops. The funny part is that copying in sports design is almost impossible to define cleanly. Football uniforms share the same basic canvas. Helmets, numbers, shoulder treatments, pant stripes, sock colors. There are only so many combinations before one team starts reminding you of another. So the real test is not whether a uniform resembles anything that came before. Everything resembles something. The test is whether the final combination creates its own identity once you see the players wearing it. That is why game day can completely change these rankings. Studio photography exaggerates texture and detail. A uniform can look incredible from 6 feet away and disappear from a broadcast camera positioned 30 yards from the field. Tiny patterns vanish, slight color differences merge, helmet finishes react differently under lights. Pants that looked perfect in promotional images can make the complete set feel unbalanced once 11 players are lined up together, and then performance starts contaminating the design conversation. If a team wins a rivalry game wearing a new uniform, suddenly the jersey has a memory attached to it. If they lose badly, fans can decide the set is cursed before it has even had a second appearance. That is why I would not treat any reveal day ranking as permanent. But as a first impression ranking, his list has been extremely consistent with one idea: reward the teams that took advantage of the moment.
أسفل القائمة ليس لأنهم سيئون، لكن بوم 8. المركز السابع هم البيرز. المركز السادس هم الكولز. كل ما أراه منه هو ذقن بارز فقط. لدينا أولاد مدينة الموسيقى في المركز الخامس. المركز الرابع الفايكنج. المركز الثالث الجاguars ذو البشرة الفاتحة. المركز الثاني لدينا فريق اوف وايت جونز وفريق SMU Texans. يا رجل أنا.
So there is his final board. Houston at number 1, Green Bay right behind them, Jacksonville high because the design is unapologetically flashy. Minnesota gets credit for the extra thematic details. The Music City concept lands in the middle because he wanted it pushed further. Detroit gets rescued by the helmet, but not enough by the rest of the set. Chicago falls because the look does not feel fresh enough to him. You can attack that order from 10 different directions, and that is exactly why the exercise works. A Packers fan can say Green Bay found the better balance between heritage and freshness. A Vikings fan can argue Minnesota did more actual theme building. A Jaguars fan can point out that Jacksonville took one of the biggest visual risks. A Lions fan can say Detroit's helmet alone deserves to move the set higher. A Chicago fan can reject the entire premise that a uniform needs to be loud in order to be successful. And a Houston fan is going to point back to that first reaction and say none of you understand what this color means here. That is the real payoff. The Texans do not win his ranking because every neutral observer is required to agree they created the objectively best uniform. They win because their design creates the strongest combination of visual impact and personal connection for the person doing the ranking. There is a difference. And I actually think that is a better way to understand these rivalry uniforms than pretending there is some mathematical scorecard for jersey design. A special uniform should provoke identity. It should make the home fan say, "That belongs to us." It should make the rival fan roll their eyes. It should create a photograph you can recognize without reading the scoreboard. Houston accomplished that for him before he even finished explaining the first jersey. Green Bay accomplished it through history and restraint. Jacksonville did it through boldness. Minnesota did it through theme. The teams lower on his list still made solid uniforms, but he did not feel the same immediate connection. Now the games themselves get the final vote. Because if one of these supposedly mid-tier uniforms ends up attached to an unforgettable rivalry win, nobody will remember where it ranked in a preseason fashion debate. Fans will remember the image of the players celebrating in it. That is how uniforms become classics. Not because everybody agreed on release day, but because something happened while the team was wearing them. So force yourself to pick one side. Do you want a rivalry uniform to be loud, risky, and unmistakably different, even if some people hate it? Or do you want teams to protect the classic identity and make only subtle changes? And if you had to put one at number one right now, are you taking Houston, Green Bay, Jacksonville, Minnesota, or somebody this ranking completely disrespected? Drop your pick in the comments, hit like if you want more NFL debates like this, and subscribe for the next one.